The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 29, The Unfinished House. Accepting an ongoing process. Welcome back to The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, and the space where we strip away the illusions, sit in the mess, and speak honestly about what it means to live in the in-between. Today, we're talking about something we're all told we should be aiming for, but rarely question, the idea of being done. We're taught to imagine a point where everything will be neatly tied up, complete, and perfected. But what if that point doesn't exist? What if the idea of finished is just a story we tell ourselves to make life feel more certain? In this episode, we'll explore what it means to live as a work in progress, to accept the scaffolding, the missing pieces, and the rooms still under construction. You'll hear personal reflections from my own life, grounded psychological insight, and practices you can use to make peace with the gaps instead of trying to erase them. Because maybe the real strength isn't in having it all figured out, but in learning to live fully while things are still taking shape. So let's begin. The myth of being done. There's a persistent cultural and personal expectation to have life neatly tied up, complete, polished, and done. The pressure to arrive at a final, perfected version of ourselves can be exhausting and often unrealistic. The truth is, no matter how much we achieve or how far we come, there will always be parts of life still under construction. Those gaps aren't flaws, they're signs that we're alive, learning, and still in motion. Accepting the beauty and value of what's unfinished allows us to breathe, to grow at our own pace, and to see the journey as something ongoing rather than a race to the end. Themes and attributes. Patience, allowing growth to unfold at its own pace. Self-compassion, releasing the pressure to meet impossible timelines. Perspective, seeing value in what's incomplete. Adaptability, adjusting to changes in the plan without losing direction. The house that's never complete. Imagine walking past a house you've seen under construction for years. At first you notice the scaffolding and tools scattered in the garden, the half-painted walls, and the windows still without shutters. But over time it becomes part of the landscape. You stop expecting it to be finished in a tidy ribbon-cutting moment. Life can feel like that house. At certain points, we believe that if we just push through, if we can get to that magic point where the paint is dry and every nail is in place, we'll finally be able to rest. The trouble is, even if we reach that stage, new repairs, adjustments, and expansions appear. The idea of done is a mirage. It keeps us running toward a horizon that moves every time we take a step. Yet just like that incomplete house, there's a quiet beauty in the scaffolding stage, the stage where life is still being shaped, refined, and reimagined. It's in this space that creativity thrives, resilience is tested, and the foundations of future joy are strengthened. The myth of completion tells us we need to arrive. Reality, and often relief, comes when we realize there's no arrival, only ongoing construction. And maybe that's where the real living happens. Personal reflection. There have been many occasions where the pressure to be done has weighed heavily on me, but one significant experience stands out. I took extended time off work to face issues that had been quietly dismantling my confidence and resilience. My bosses were in regular contact, mainly to ensure I was supplying medical notes to justify my absence. At first, the contact was neutral, but as time passed, the tone shifted, and subtle nudges became outright pressure to return before I was ready. I was still in the thick of processing my emotions, trying to rebuild a sense of stability, and I had no idea when that process would be complete. It wasn't that I didn't want to work, it was that I couldn't. My focus, energy, and mental clarity were gone. But my reality didn't fit their timetable. Eventually, they sent me to an occupational health specialist. We spoke at length on several occasions, and while they listened, I never felt genuine understanding or empathy. I was following the law and the company's policies in taking the time I needed, but they dismissed the validity of my self-awareness because my diagnoses weren't yet official. Within a year, those diagnoses came, but by then I'd made my decision and I left. The refusal to make reasonable adjustments, which they were legally obliged to do, spoke volumes. Even with union support, the company's stance didn't shift. It was disheartening and discouraging. I had wanted to find a way to remain in my role, even in a reduced capacity, but it became clear that the pressure to return wasn't about my well-being. It was about their deadlines. Since then, I've noticed I still put too much pressure on myself to have everything figured out. But a deeper part of me now understands that maybe the work of life isn't about reaching a perfect, completed version of ourselves. Perhaps the point is learning to live comfortably with the scaffolding, to accept that we are all works in progress, and that's not a shortcoming, but a truth. Psychological insight. This experience ties closely to perfectionism, anxiety, and the societal bias toward closure. The belief that an unfinished state is inherently uncomfortable or unacceptable. Zeigarnik, 1927. The Zeigarnik effect, discovered by Bloomer Zeigarnik, suggests that our minds naturally fixate more on incomplete tasks than completed ones, which can create mental tension and a compulsive drive to finish. In my case, that drive was amplified by external pressure. My workplace, like many, operated under a productivity over wellness model where progress is measured by output, not health. This clashed directly with my reality. My recovery was not a linear process with a tidy endpoint, and any attempt to force completion would have undermined it. Through reflection, I began to recognize how much of my stress came from trying to match my internal timeline to an external one. The mismatch wasn't just frustrating, it was harmful. It pushed me into cycles of self-blame and hypervigilance, as though I had to prove I was worthy of the time I was taking. Now I see the unfinished parts of my life differently. They are not failures or delays. They are living spaces where change is still possible. They're also reminders that personal growth doesn't have a project deadline. Letting go of the illusion of being done has allowed me to focus on adaptability, self-compassion, and sustained patience, qualities that make ongoing progress sustainable. Insight prompts 1. Where in your life are you putting pressure on yourself to be finished? 2. How would it feel to see those areas as works in progress rather than incomplete failures? Theory in action. Next time you feel the urge to finish something before it's ready, pause and name the stage you're in. Ask yourself, what's the value of leaving this open for now? What can this unfinished space teach me? Write down 3 ways the current in progress state is serving you, even if it feels uncomfortable. Keep this list somewhere visible to remind you that growth often happens in the scaffolding stage. Living with the scaffolding. There's a strange duality in living with unfinished parts of your life. On one hand, you've learned to function in the in-between, to walk through rooms with missing walls and still call it home. On the other hand, there's an ever-present temptation to rush the work, to pull the scaffolding down before the beams are strong enough. This stage requires not just patience, but a steady trust that progress can happen without constant urgency. The scaffolding isn't there to block you, it's there to hold you while the structure takes shape. Themes and attributes. Patience in process, staying steady when progress is slow or invisible. Trust in timing, believing that the right elements will fall into place when ready. Emotional flexibility, adapting to shifts without losing your footing. Protective structure, understanding the value of temporary supports. The street under repair. There's a road in my area that seems to be under construction every time I pass by. Bright orange cones line the pavements, machinery hums in the distance, and half the lanes are blocked. At first I used to get frustrated. Why is it taking so long? Why can't they just finish? But over time, I noticed something. The work was happening in stages, often invisible to the casual passerby. First, they'd dig deep under the surface to replace unseen pipes. Then they'd level the ground. Only after weeks or months would the new surface be laid. Life is a lot like that road. We can't always see the foundational changes happening beneath the surface. There are stretches where nothing looks different from the outside, but beneath the surface, deep repairs are underway, the kind of work that ensures what's built on top will last. The cones, the barriers, the slow diversions aren't signs of stagnation. They're signs that the work is active, even if the progress isn't flashy. We might feel impatient, longing for the day the barriers come down and the road feels smooth again. But if we dismantle the scaffolding too soon, we risk building on a weak foundation. The trick is to learn to live alongside the scaffolding, not as a nuisance, but as a quiet guardian of the work still to come. Personal reflection, I've had stretches in my life where the scaffolding was everywhere, literal and metaphorical. Times when projects, relationships, and my self-development were all under repair. One of the most vivid was when I was deep into creating the Inversiverse. It was a massive undertaking, and while I was excited, the process was so layered that at times I felt like I was stuck in endless prep work rather than building the final thing. There were research phases that seemed to last forever, sections I'd write and then completely tear down, and moments where the whole thing felt like it would never be finished. But somewhere along the way, I realized that those periods weren't wasted time. They were strengthening the core of the project. The depth, the structure, and the connections between ideas needed space to form. It's the same in my personal life. After certain breakups or career shifts, I've had to accept that being ready isn't a switch I can flip. The scaffolding has to stay up until the new walls can stand on their own. I've learned that the scaffolding stage isn't a failure or delay. It's where the real foundation is laid. The frustration often comes from wanting others to see the invisible progress, when in reality, it's enough that I know it's there. Psychological insight. This stage connects closely to process-oriented thinking and the principle of delayed gratification. Michel, 1972. In a world driven by instant results, our brains are wired to prefer short-term rewards over long-term benefits. The scaffolding stage challenges that wiring by offering little immediate payoff while demanding sustained effort. In my own experience, impatience during the scaffolding stage has often come from a mismatch between my internal process and the external expectations placed on me. Research on self-determination theory, Deci and Ryan 1985, suggests that we thrive when our sense of autonomy, competence, and relatedness is supported. But during periods of slow progress, those needs can feel under threat, especially if people around us question the pace or validity of our work. I've also noticed that living with scaffolding requires a form of emotional reframing. Instead of seeing temporary supports as proof of incompleteness, I now see them as active tools of protection. Just as a building under repair needs barriers to shield it from collapse, my boundaries and slower pace are the scaffolding that ensures my emotional and mental foundation can hold the weight of what comes next. Insight prompts. Where in your life are you living with scaffolding that you wish you could take down right now? How might that scaffolding be protecting or strengthening you? Theory in action. Next time you feel frustrated about slow progress, write down 3 invisible changes happening beneath the surface. Things others can't see but you know are shifting. Keep the list where you can revisit it when the urge to rush or tear down the scaffolding appears. The illusion of arrival. There's a seductive pull to the idea of arriving. We imagine a future version of ourselves who has ticked every box, healed every wound, and finally earned the right to relax. It's a comforting vision, the day when life becomes smooth and stable, free from the discomfort of change. But in reality, arrival is often an illusion. Every time we think we've reached the final destination, life shifts the map, introducing new challenges, desires, or unexpected detours. Accepting this isn't about giving up ambition. It's about learning to find contentment in the continuous journey rather than postponing it for some mythical endpoint. Themes and attributes. Realistic expectations, recognizing that life will always have moving parts. Resilience in change, meeting shifting circumstances with flexibility. Present moment fulfillment, finding satisfaction before reaching a final goal. Iterative growth, allowing progress to happen in cycles, not straight lines. The moving horizon. When I was younger, I believed that success was a single point in the distance, a job title, a certain income, or a milestone in my personal life. I thought that once I reached it, the road would straighten out and the work would be done. But every time I got close to what I thought was the horizon, it moved. The job came with new pressures. The relationship introduced new dynamics. The personal breakthrough revealed deeper layers of work I hadn't seen before. It's a bit like walking toward a horizon on an open plain. No matter how many steps you take, it never gets closer in the way you imagined. And yet, each step changes your perspective. The view shifts, new details emerge, and you realize that perhaps the purpose isn't to arrive at the horizon, but to keep walking, to let the journey itself shape you. When we cling to the idea of a permanent arrival point, we set ourselves up for disappointment. But when we release it, something changes. We start to notice the value in where we are right now, rather than holding joy hostage for a future that will inevitably evolve. Personal reflection. There have been many points in my life where I believed I was approaching an arrival, a moment where things would finally settle. One that stands out was when I transitioned into running my projects after leaving traditional employment. I thought this was it, the independence, the freedom, the creative control I'd been craving, and for a while it was exhilarating. My days were mine to shape, and the work felt aligned with who I was becoming. But as the months passed, I realized that independence brought its own set of challenges. Instead of one boss, I now had to find my work clients, deadlines, and the pressure of constant self-management. I was wearing every hat, creator, marketer, and accountant, and the weight was heavy. The freedom I'd imagined was, in reality, a more complex balancing act than anything I'd navigated before. That experience taught me that even when we think we've arrived, we're still in motion. The satisfaction I'd been chasing wasn't in the circumstances themselves, but in how I related to them. Once I let go of the belief that I needed to lock in a perfect state, I could see the beauty in a more fluid, evolving life. It's not about crossing the finish line. It's about learning how to run without expecting the race to end. Psychological insight. This ties closely to the concept of the hedonic treadmill, Brickman and Campbell, 1971, which suggests that no matter what positive changes occur, we tend to return to a baseline level of happiness. Achievements and milestones give us temporary boosts, but over time we adapt and the sense of fulfillment fades. In my own life, I've seen how this plays out. The momentary high of a breakthrough is followed by a new set of goals, challenges, or realities to navigate. The danger is in mistaking this natural adaptation for failure, when in truth, it's part of the human condition. The antidote is a shift in focus from destination to process. Mindfulness practices support this by anchoring us in the present, helping us appreciate the journey without over-investing in an endpoint that will inevitably shift. For me, learning to see my progress as an ongoing cycle rather than a final goal has softened the disappointment of the moving horizon and replaced it with a deeper sense of trust in the path itself. Insight prompts. Where in your life are you waiting for arrival before you allow yourself to feel content? How might you bring some of that contentment into your present circumstances instead? Theory in action this week. Take one goal you've been aiming for and identify 3 ways you can experience part of its benefit now. If your goal is financial stability, for example, focus on one small financial win you can create today. If it's better health, notice one way you can nurture your body in the next 24 hours. Treat these small steps not as placeholders but as genuine moments of arrival in themselves. Living in the scaffolding. There's a quiet courage in living with things unfinished. It's not just about tolerating the gaps, but actively making a home within them, knowing the walls aren't fully built yet, but still hanging up a picture or lighting a candle. This is where life asks us to stop waiting for perfection before we allow ourselves to belong in our own story. Instead of seeing the scaffolding as a temporary inconvenience, we can begin to view it as part of the architecture of our lives, a structure that supports growth, adapts to changes, and reminds us that the work isn't supposed to be invisible. Themes and attributes. Acceptance, feeling at home even when things aren't finished. Practical optimism, planning improvements without needing them instantly. Resourcefulness, making use of what's available in the present. Emotional endurance, staying steady in long-term uncertainty. The lived-in renovation. There's a special kind of resilience in people who live through renovations. They cook in half a kitchen, sleep in a room with exposed plaster, and find ways to make beauty of dust and disruption. They don't wait for the final reveal before hosting a friend for tea. They make space for living now. Life under construction is like that. We can either hold off on joy until the work is done, or we can find ways to enjoy the space as it is messy, noisy, and imperfect. The scaffolding becomes less of a reminder of what's missing and more of a sign that we are still building, still adding to the story. This reframing changes everything. Instead of holding our breath for the big reveal, we breathe into the now, knowing the process itself is what makes the final form possible. Personal reflection. There was a time in my life when it felt like every part of my world was under renovation. I had just moved into a new flat, which on paper looked perfect, but in reality needed adjustments and constant tinkering. At the same time, I was making major changes in my personal life, ending old relationships, redefining boundaries, and trying to establish new routines. It was overwhelming. I wanted everything to click into place immediately, but the more I tried to fast-track the process, the more frustrated I became. Eventually, I realized I couldn't live in a state of constant pause until it was all done. I worked on creative projects even though my workspace wasn't set up perfectly. I began to find a strange sense of pride in the visible scaffolding. It reminded me I was doing the work, that things were changing. Those months taught me that waiting for completion before allowing joy is like refusing to eat until the kitchen is fully stocked. I learned that I could create moments of peace and connection in the middle of the mess, and that maybe the presence of the scaffolding made those moments even more meaningful. Ecological insight. This mindset shift reflects the concept of cognitive reframing, Beck, 1976, a core principle in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's the practice of changing the way we interpret a situation to alter its emotional impact. Instead of viewing the unfinished as a flaw or limitation, reframing it as evidence of progress can transform frustration into motivation. I also see parallels with positive psychology's focus on savoring, Bryant and Veroff, 2007, intentionally appreciating the good that's present, even in less than ideal conditions. For me, learning to savor moments in an unfinished space taught me that my life didn't have to be complete to be worth enjoying. Over time, this approach reduced my anxiety about timelines. It allowed me to recognize that living well is not something you postpone until after the dust settles. The scaffolding stage is not just a waiting room, it's a vital chapter in the story of becoming. Insight prompts. What parts of your life are still under renovation, and how are you treating them? What moments of joy or connection could you allow yourself now, even before the work is finished? Theory in action. Pick one area of your life that feels incomplete and make a deliberate choice to use it as it is this week. If your home isn't perfect, host a meal in it. If your creative project isn't fully developed, share a draft with someone you trust. The goal is to practice living fully in the scaffolding rather than postponing life until the work is done. The pressure to present perfection. One of the biggest challenges of living with an unfinished life is the pressure from ourselves, from others, and from the unspoken rules of society to present it as if it's already complete. Social media, workplace culture, and even casual conversations can push us toward a polished image that hides the messy reality of our ongoing process. The danger is that this performance not only drains energy, but it also disconnects us from our truth. We start investing more effort into appearing done than into actually living authentically in the stage we're in. Themes and attributes. Authenticity, allowing others to see the real state of your life. Vulnerability, risking exposure of the unfinished parts. Integrity, staying true to your process rather than editing it for approval. Resilience, holding your ground when others expect a more polished picture. Narrative framing, the unfinished room you let guests see. Imagine you have a room in your home that's only half decorated. The walls are bare in places, the shelves aren't yet filled, and there's still a paint tin in the corner. Normally, you'd keep the door shut when visitors arrive, but one day you decide to leave it open. You don't apologize for it, you don't rush to explain, you simply let it be part of what they see. That's what authenticity in an unfinished life looks like. It's about not hiding the scaffolding when someone steps into your world. It's about resisting the urge to apologize for the reality of your process, because the truth is the mess and the beauty are happening at the same time. Personal reflection. There was a period in my life when I was trying to hold together two versions of myself, the one that looked like I was thriving and the one that was quietly still rebuilding. I remember attending a social gathering during that time. On the outside, I appeared confident and composed, smiling, making conversation, and playing the role of someone back on track. But inside, I was still in the middle of heavy emotional work. My routines were shaky, my sleep was inconsistent, and there were days when I barely felt present in my skin. Yet the fear of being judged as not over it yet pushed me to keep up the appearance. The turning point came when I spoke honestly to a friend about where I was really at. I expected them to be uncomfortable, maybe even to pull back. Instead, they told me they respected me more for not pretending everything was fine. That moment taught me something important. People often respond to our unfinished truth with more compassion than we expect. It's our own internalized standards that keep us hiding. Since then, I've been more intentional about showing my process, not just the polished parts. It's not always comfortable, but it feels far less exhausting than keeping up any facade. Psychological insight. What I experienced reflects the theory of impression management, Goffman 1959, and the ways we consciously or unconsciously attempt to control how others perceive us. While some level of impression management is natural, overuse can lead to emotional dissonance, where our outward persona doesn't match our inner reality. Research in vulnerability and connection, particularly by Brené Brown, highlights that authenticity and openness, even about our imperfections, often deepen relationships rather than weaken them. In my case, dropping the polished performance allowed me to experience genuine connection rather than relationships based on a curated image. Psychologically, hiding our unfinished parts reinforces the belief that they are unacceptable. By showing them, we challenge that belief and permit ourselves to live more honestly within the scaffolding stage. Over time, this builds resilience and reduces the anxiety that comes from constantly managing appearances. Insight prompts. What areas of your life are you currently trying to make look finished for others? How might it feel to let someone you trust see the real unfinished version? Theory in action. Choose one interaction this week where you will resist the urge to over-polish your reality. It could be in conversation with a friend, in a social media post, or even in how you describe your current situation to a colleague. Share something honestly that you would normally edit or hide. Observe how it impacts your connection and your sense of relief. Learning to live in the middle. One of the most powerful shifts in embracing an unfinished life is learning to live in the middle. That strange space where you're no longer who you were, but you're not yet the person you're becoming. It's a stage that can feel uncomfortable, uncertain, and even directionless, but it's also where transformation is quietly taking shape. Living in the middle means resisting the urge to speed toward closure and instead choosing to inhabit the present moment, even when it feels incomplete. Themes and attributes. Presence, staying with the current stage instead of rushing through it. Acceptance, recognizing the value of this transitional space. Self-trust, believing that the process will carry you forward. Patience with ambiguity, holding space for uncertainty without collapsing into fear. The bridge between two shores. Picture yourself standing on a long wooden bridge between two shores. Behind you lies the old life, familiar but no longer a fit. Ahead is a new shore, enticing but still out of reach. The temptation is to sprint across, to get to the other side as quickly as possible. But what if you paused in the middle? From there, you can see both shores. You can feel the breeze, hear the water beneath, and notice the details you'd miss if you were rushing. It's not the final destination, but it's not nothing either. It's a vantage point, a breathing space, a place where clarity often arrives without being forced. Personal reflection. I've had many moments in my life where I found myself on that metaphorical bridge, but one stands out sharply. After leaving a job that had drained me to the point of burnout, I was in no rush to jump into the next role. At first, it felt liberating, endless possibilities, no immediate deadlines, space to breathe. But as weeks turned into months, the anxiety crept in. People began asking, "What's next for you?" as if I was supposed to have a neatly packaged answer. My old self would have scrambled to produce one, even if it wasn't true. Instead, I decided to sit with the uncertainty, even when it made me restless. I started walking more, journaling daily, and exploring ideas without committing to any one path. There were days when it felt like nothing was happening, but in hindsight, those empty days were full of subtle shifts. My priorities were rearranging themselves. I was letting go of old patterns and starting to imagine what I wanted life to look like without the pressure of an immediate decision. It wasn't a quick or linear process, but the lessons I learned in that space about patience, about listening inwardly, about trusting my timing, have stayed with me far longer than any sense of arrival could have. Psychological insight. This experience reflects the concept of liminality, originally explored by anthropologist Arnold van Gennep and later expanded by Victor Turner. Liminality refers to the transitional stage in a rite of passage, where an individual has left one identity but has not yet fully entered another. In psychological terms, liminal spaces can trigger discomfort because they disrupt our sense of stability and control. However, research in mindfulness and resilience shows that deliberately inhabiting these in-between spaces can increase emotional flexibility and creativity. By not rushing toward premature closure, we allow deeper integration of our experiences and more authentic decision-making. For me, resisting the impulse to leap into the next chapter immediately was an exercise in self-trust. It was about recognizing that the discomfort of not yet could coexist with the quiet progress of becoming. Insight prompts. Where in your life are you currently on the bridge between two versions of yourself? What would it feel like to pause there and let the view shape you before you move forward? Theory and action this week. Choose one area where you feel pressure to move forward faster than you're ready. Instead of forcing action, create a ritual of presence, a daily walk, a few minutes of journaling, or even a quiet moment with a cup of tea. Use that ritual to remind yourself that you don't have to be on the far shore yet to be making progress. The gift of the incomplete. When we stop seeing the unfinished as a problem to solve, we open ourselves to the possibility that it might be a gift. The gaps and the scaffolding in our lives leave space for surprise, creativity, and connection. They make room for others to contribute, for new opportunities to emerge, and for us to grow beyond the plans we thought we needed to stick to. The gift of the incomplete is that it reminds us we are still becoming. Themes and attributes. Openness, welcoming what the incomplete allows to enter. Humility, recognizing we don't have all the answers yet. Collaboration, allowing others to be part of our process. Resilience, seeing incompletion as potential, not weakness. The unplanted garden, imagine a garden where some beds are full of thriving plants, others have seedlings just starting to sprout, and a few remain bare, waiting for something to be planted. To an untrained eye, it might look unfinished, even neglected, but the gardener knows those empty beds are not failures, they are invitations. Space held open for the right season, the right seeds, the right timing. Life is much the same. Our unplanted spaces aren't proof that we've failed to complete the picture. They're proof that the picture is still alive, still evolving, still waiting for the next chapter to take root. Personal reflection. There have been times in my life when I've looked at the spaces that felt empty and judged myself harshly for them. I thought, if I were further along, this part would be sorted by now. One clear example was after I left a relationship that had defined much of my day-to-day life. The absence was overwhelming, not just of the person, but of routines, shared friends, and the future I'd imagined. At first, I rushed to fill that space, lining up social plans, taking on extra work, and trying to force my way back to normal. It was exhausting. Eventually, I let the emptiness sit. I stopped trying to fill it just for the sake of avoiding discomfort. I spent more time outdoors, let my weekends be quiet, and learned to notice the small things that nourished me. A walk in the sun, an unplanned conversation, a book I'd been meaning to read for years. Over time, new connections and opportunities began to emerge naturally, ones I never would have found if I'd rushed to complete the space. Now when I see empty areas in my life, I'm more able to recognize them as the unplanted beds in my garden, full of potential, even if they look bare for now. Psychological insight. This reframing aligns with concepts from positive psychology, particularly Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory. Fredrickson's research shows that positive emotions, even subtle ones like curiosity or openness, expand our awareness and encourage us to explore, which in turn builds resources for future resilience. When we label something as incomplete and immediately try to fix it, we can shut down this process. But when we allow that space to remain open, our mind stays in a state of possibility rather than urgency. This openness is where creative solutions, unexpected relationships, and personal growth often take root. In my own experience, learning to see incompletion as fertile ground rather than as a gap to be filled has reduced my anxiety about not being there yet, and increased my capacity to respond flexibly when life takes an unexpected turn. Insight prompts. What is one empty bed in your own life that you've been judging harshly? How could you reframe it as space being held open for something yet to come? Theory in action, pick one area of your life that feels incomplete. Instead of rushing to fill it, commit to observing it over the next month. Keep a simple journal of moments where this space allows for something unexpected, a new idea, a conversation, or even rest. At the end of the month, review your notes and see how the empty space has been quietly serving you. Accepting an ongoing process. Finishing your life like it's a project with a final ribbon cutting isn't the point. The scaffolding, the half-painted walls, the unpaved paths, they're not signs you're failing. They're proof you're still building. Some people will see your unfinished spaces and respect them. They'll understand that progress doesn't always look polished. Others will expect a grand reveal, as though your worth only arrives when the work is done. And a few won't know how to stand with you in a place that's still in motion. Living in an unfinished house means learning to welcome those who can sit comfortably among the tools and dust, the ones who don't rush you toward a vision you're not ready for, but instead appreciate the beauty of what's already here. You've been listening to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. Until next time, stay human, stay awake, and keep building at your own pace. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of The Inversiverse, a journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 The Simulated Self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 The Spell of the Mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 Conscious Seduction journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 The Myth of Sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 The Algorithmic Mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 The Noise of Knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 Belief Machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 Submerged Signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 The Alchemy Within traces food, frequency, and the forgotten intelligence of the body. Episode 20 Encoded Flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.